21 is moving us into the lymphatic and the immune system. And when we look at the immune system, it is our defense system. Now, under normal circumstances, that system is working to fight off anything that it feels is foreign. Now, as long as the system is working great, that means it's not attacking your self cells. What do I mean by a self cell? The cells of your body, okay? It's trying to attack what's not a self cell. However, there are things that can and do go wrong. The cool thing about this system, it is a collection of cells. Think back to those white blood cells, okay? And then biochemicals, meaning substances that we'll have in what's termed our lymphatic system. We have lymphatic vessels. They travel right beside the blood vessels. All right, and there's a reason for that. Okay, now it circulates fluid, definitely associated with the cardiovascular system. It transports excess fluid from intestinal spaces, transports fluid to the bloodstream, transports fat to the bloodstream, and helps defend against all types of diseases. That is the pathway. It travels very close to the blood vessels. Note that it empties into the bloodstream. Okay? When we look at the lymph vessels are going to also have capillaries. The capillaries are at the area of the blood vessel capillary beds. There's a reason for this. At this capillary bed, all right, this is where we get the exchange of materials. It is at the point where cells are doing their job. So one of the things that's present at this point is extracellular fluid, ECF. In the extracellular fluid, all right, if you look at an area where you've got cells, okay, this extracellular fluid, it's going to contain the nutrients and the wastes. Now, from our understanding, we know that some of the waste moves into the blood vessels. About 10% of the waste, this extracellular fluid, about 10% will move into these lymph capillaries. So these lymph capillaries have a really close relationship to this area here where we have the capillary beds. So fluid that's out here will get to move into these capillaries. Now, once we move that fluid into those capillaries, Just like we had with the blood vessels, we've got lymph vessels. This fluid, once it enters, it becomes lymph. Okay? I guess in some cases you can call it fluid, but the proper term is lymph. Okay? Once we get that fluid into the vessels, note these vessels have flaps because we need that fluid to move in one direction. We need it to be pushed up those lymph vessels. So these vessels, once again, 3 layers, and then those vessels, as that lymph travels up those vessels, they begin to encounter the lymph nodes. And then it flows into what we term the lymphatic trunks. Lymph nodes.
Why do they get swollen when you get sick?
Now, why do they get swollen when you get sick? How?
All your white blood cells move to that area to fight off the pathogens.
It's not that those white blood cells all move to that area. The white blood cells that are in that lymph node waiting for that fluid to pass through, and because that fluid will have something, there are cells that are in there just waiting for it to come through, and they begin to proliferate. They begin to increase in number so they can fight the pathogen. If they need to, they can leave and go to the area and fight the infection. Does that make sense? Okay, so we have areas throughout the body where lymph nodes are more concentrated. All right. Now, note that one of the things that it's supposed to do is supposed to travel to a trunk. Okay, so we have to move fluid everywhere. We have to move it from the tip of our toes up, from the top of our head down. Is everybody following me? Now, we're going to find that we have trunks that are present. These trunks are going to be very large vessels, lots of nodes. Okay, and then we're going to eventually empty into some major veins that are going to go back to the heart. If we look at areas where lymph nodes are concentrated, okay, and if we begin to follow our large vessels, note they want to empty into larger veins that will go to the heart. By the time the fluid that has moved all through these nodes, these vessels, by the time it empties to the heart, it should be super clean. Okay? Is everybody with me so far? So when we begin to look at lymph, okay, lymph is based on that fluid in the tissues at that capillary bed. All right? That fluid of those tissues, of those cells, okay, basically it's almost like plasma. That fluid, that extracellular fluid, water, dissolved substances, okay, stuff that's been picked up from the cells doing their job. Now, lymph itself, the fluid, when we begin to look at lymph, okay, basically that fluid that was around the tissues, all right, it's going to be able to move into the capillaries. Once that fluid moves into the capillaries, we are creating lymph. Now, one of the cool things, and note, it's only about 10% of that extracellular fluid that makes it into those lymph capillaries. However, it's very important to get rid of that. Because if the capillary, this lymph system is not working properly, that builds up, that fluid builds up in the tissues, and we now have edema. And that's not good, okay? It can actually be a chronic problem, it can be an acute problem, but you don't want fluid sitting around those tissues. So, the way that we can see this lymph get formed, if we have the tissues around that lymph capillary, and we've got all that extracellular fluid that is surrounding it, there are pressures that are present, okay? That extracellular fluid versus that lymph capillary, there are pressures that exist, and based on what we know, material wants to move from areas of high to low pressure, correct? So if the pressure builds up in those tissues, it will force little holes, little slits in those capillaries open, and the fluid moves into the lymph capillaries. It's one-way movement though. Yeah, so if we look at the lymph capillary, the tissues that are close to it, extracellular fluid, okay, pressure will build up out here, and then little slits will open, and it'll let that fluid move in. It has now become lymph. Anything that's in that fluid moves with it. Okay? So, these vessels, they're actually important. Look at this. Absorption of dietary fats. Delivering fats to the bloodstream. Mine work way too well. These are termed lacteals. They're found in the digestive system. They're going to have a very close relationship to the intestines, and they're helping to deliver the fats that we consume. Because that's a really special process. They also help collect excess fluid, get it to the bloodstream, and deal with foreign particles. Now that gets kind of interesting. Like I said, pressure is present at that cellular level. Once we get that fluid into those capillaries, we have to make sure that that fluid is going to move.